Welcome, and please remember that this board appreciates participation from the public. If you have comments throughout the board meeting or work session, please stand, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. With a quorum of the board present, I call the meeting to order. Commissioner Timbo.
Present.
Commissioner Eric.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Bocke.
Here.
Commissioner Evans.
Here.
And I am also here. With that, we'll stand and say the pledge of allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll start with the consent agenda. The consent agenda is made up of routine day-to-day items that require board action but do not appear to have a significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion and vote by any board member. We have approval of the board minutes from October 2018, Finance Committee meeting minutes from November 8th, 2018, payroll checks totaling $94,939.02, maintenance and operation checks series number 24252 through 24312 totaling $668,180.53. Approval of the passenger facility charge totaling $65,000, and financial reports for October 2018. Are there any questions or are there any items that a board member wishes to be pulled from the consent agenda? Seeing none, is there a motion?
Move we accept the consent agenda as published.
And I'll second the motion. Is there any further questions or discussion? All those in favor of accepting the consent agenda as written, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Consent agenda is passed. John, the director's report.
Yes, just a couple of quick notes. The airport did present to the TBID board this last month, and they have agreed to extend incentives for an LA flight to a second year of flights. That was a request at the request of Allegiant. So we now have an incentive package that would span 2 years, 2 summers of flights, twice a week to LA. And we expect we'll probably hear on that route probably yet this year. So we're excited to have that possibility with Allegiant to bring back some LA flying. I think we're hitting a good time. That market has really grown substantially over the last 5 years since we had the flight back in 2014. And the Canadian traffic, we've really seen that perking up this fall. So I think that would be a route we could count on to be popular with the Canadians because of the theme parks and the other family destinations. For those of you that, well, I think all of you that weren't on board back in 2014, that route was announced in late March. And I think we figured we had 6 weeks between the time that route was announced and the flights began. And so the route started off pretty poorly in June and improved in performance throughout the summer. But now that we have a full year, if we could get that flight or a full half year, if we could get that flight announced before Christmas and get families time to plan some vacations, we feel that route could be very successful for us. So we're pretty excited about that one. TBID has voted to assist us for 2 years with that route. And we're very excited to hear that. They also extended some marketing dollars for the Chicago route again next year. We're in the process of trying to get the FAA to extend our SCASD grant. You may remember 3 years ago we got a grant from the Small Community Air Source Development Grant Program to bring Chicago flights to Great Falls. And we're trying to get that grant has sunsetted, but most often the FAA will extend it for an additional year if you have seasonal flights. Since ours are summer only, and so we expect that they'll extend that probably in the next couple of weeks, and that we'll have a decision on Chicago yet this year also. And ideally, those flights will go on sale before Christmas. As we've spoken in the past, believe it or not, Christmas gifts are fairly popular with tickets and that type of thing, and so we like to see those as families get together in the holiday season, they plan their summer vacations together, they plan trips home. We want to see those flights go on sale before the holidays. It's the best time for us to have that information out there. So a couple of decisions expected yet this year on routes. It's something we're very excited about. The other thing I'll highlight is the United flights now are at 3 times per day to Denver. That change was announced during the spring along with the Chicago expansion. And we're seeing tremendous growth in the United flying. They were up 35% in October. In September, that was our largest city pair. They actually outgunned Salt Lake for the most passengers. And so they were within 35 seats of doing so in October also. So we're seeing some really great competition. And I was just at a meeting this morning down at the school district and heard from a business member down there that he had run into some folks in the airport that had brought their kids up from Missoula to fly out of Great Falls because it was so much cheaper. And I can tell you that's a direct result of the expansion of that United flying. So we're very excited to see that growth. That flight is being well adopted. They're running good load factors. We're seeing exceptional rates this fall into winter. And so really excited about that growth in the passenger side of things. On the construction side, Rod, could you maybe give us a little update on how things are going? As you know, we're a little late getting into the season this year, but Rod can kind of update you a little bit on how things are going.
Yeah, all the water lines the airport's doing are complete. They were completed a few weeks ago, so the new 8-inch and 12-inch and the 16-inch water main extensions were completed. They're just finishing up probably in the next 2 days on a tie-in that goes to the Eagle jet hangar. So that'll loop that whole system down there, 16-inch, 12 inches, and 8-inch lines. So that's coming together really well. And then on Monday, or a week ago Monday, they did start on our building expansion. So we've got that underway. They just did some excavating. They haven't really started building anything yet, but that is underway. We expect maybe in a week or two they'll start pouring concrete and stuff. So that's coming along pretty good. Of course, the Eagle jet hangar, it's moving along pretty well. They're just about ready to set the trusses, waiting for the wind to die down now. So they attempted yesterday, but a little too much. So Thursday we might see the top of it going up. And along with the water lines, we did talk to the city. They were at a meeting today. They are filling the new water tank. Started today, I believe, and chlorinating it and going to get it cleaned up. And it should be online maybe in a week or so, maybe a little more. So maybe we'll see some water pressure differences up here.
When does this one come down around?
I would imagine probably next spring.
Okay.
They talked about trying to do it this year, but now that it's getting colder, I think they're going to wait till springtime. So,
Okay.
but I would imagine they'll take it offline as soon as that other one's going, because it does leak, and the wintertime they have more problems with it. So,
I'm going to mention the sewer line.
in the sewer line, yeah, that will be the next thing. As soon as they're done with the water line, hopefully this week, then they'll go right into the sewer line. So we'll be getting sewer down by all those private hangars. Imagine that'll go pretty quick. They're going to use a different method of digging down there. They're going to use a rotary, I call it rock saw, but a trenching machine on a wheel. So that will handle the rocks a lot better. It should be quicker.
Not as deep either, so. right.
Yeah, it's still pretty deep.
Is it?
Rod, the water line that goes down to that area loops, but it can go further west as well?
Yeah,
Was it sized for that?
yep,
For non-airport development?
it could, yeah. And when we did the SRA building in 13, 14, there somewhere, we did take that water line across the road too for that area, so.
For airport property over there?
Yeah, between the interstate and the frontage road, there is a T over there now
Sure.
too, so.
But was it requested to upsize that line to go further west off airport property?
Yeah,
That was
when we
part of
did
the
it, yeah,
Right.
the
Yeah.
city actually paid to upsize it.
Yeah, they upsized it, presuming that they would eventually have development beyond the airport.
They paid for just the upsizing.
Yeah,
We
just the
paid
difference.
for the rest of it?
Yeah,
So without our payment, it probably wouldn't have been done,
No.
right? Without the development.
That was over $500,000 of the utilities,
Yeah,
wasn't
it
it,
was.
Rod? About $600,000-$700,000
Yeah.
of utilities.
Okay, yep.
and the city just paid the difference between, I think,
Pipe
a 12
size.
inch and a
Sure.
16 inch, so.
Right.
But, yeah, I think that's pretty much it on construction. Dwight's project's moving along really well, the tank farm, so looks good over there.
There's a lot going on. I mean, I think, even, without the development down here in the corner, there's easily $6 million worth of tenant work, in the process right now, so.
Sorry, 6 million?
About $6 million in tenant work right now on the field, so, that's encouraging to see that kind of development, and if we can get the corner development going, that's another 12 million, so, that'd be about 18 million in tenant improvements, which is of course taxable, so, pretty exciting development there, so.
Is there any update on the TIF money from the city for the?
I believe that hearing is next week, right, Maria?
December 4th.
December 4th, so next Tuesday, we'll be down at the city to attend that hearing, Tuesday night.
John, is there any update on the corner?
We did hear from planning, and they didn't think they'd have time to review the application this year, but Laura was able to talk them into a December 20th meeting. So the appeals board, what's the name of that board? It's the Board of Adjustments?
Maybe.
I'm not familiar with the Board of Adjustments, but they're hearing it on the 20th. And so presuming, I don't believe the developer had paid the application fee. It's about $1,500 non-refundable. And so, I think, they're going to have to pay the application fee, but assuming they pay that, we'll be on the 20th, and we'll hear that.
They've already paid it.
Have they already paid it?
They had to do it with their submission.
Oh, they had to do it, because we had to put a public notice in last week. So there's a hearing on the 20th, and we'll find out about the sign. The developers lowered the request down to 40 feet now. I think the initial was 60. So the city allows 25, the developers at 40. There's also some concerns because they want a sign in there for truck scales. If you look over on your way out, if you look at the development that's across the highway there, the Flying J, they have a truck scale sign to tell the truckers where to go the way. And because of the sign for the development and then the truck scale sign, they've also exceeded the square footage of signage that they're allowed to have on the site. So there's kind of two questions now. There's the height of the sign, and then there's the square footage of the sign. And I think just last week, planning asked for the wall sizes of all the walls on the building. So I think they may be concerned about the amount of signage that's being put on the sides of the building also. So it sounds like that hearing, there might be a number of questions that are going to come up with regard to signage on that development. But ideally, we'll get through that, and we'll be back into planning the site, and maybe even make it in time for spring construction.
What's the,
And one last question, which airport is Allegiant going to fly into LA? Are they going into LAX?
LAX, yeah, LAX is there. They've talked about other cities, but or other airports in that city, but Burbank has a very short runway. So those conversations, the CEO has even said we're going to change airports, but then there's never any progress that seems to follow that in terms of making a change. So yeah, LAX is their airport. They are flying into San Diego now too. That's another possibility is that, at the last minute, they might want to talk about San Diego instead of LA. But as far as we know, LA is going to be the opportunity.
sorry, the corner development's about 12 million?
12 million, 40 jobs.
Who is on that board? Do we know how many people
I
are?
don't know anything about that
I
board,
think
to be
it has
honest.
5 people on
And
it.
they're from the public at large, are they not?
I think so.
I'd like to know who they are.
And right now, we're there because the sign's over the city limit,
Yeah.
even though it's across the highway from the same types of signs.
Those were grandfathered in because the signage ordinance was passed since I've been here. I don't know the exact year, but, and then of course, one of the developments across the highway is in the county.
Okay.
And, the developer is buying some county land, the Swanson land they're buying is in the county. And at the first hearing, I did ask, well, could we leave a parcel in the county and put the sign on the county property? But planning told us that they wouldn't allow the sign to be in the county and the development to be in the city, that still not be kosher. And so we did make an attempt at that one because I thought, well, if we could get into the county, maybe this wouldn't be an issue, but it doesn't sound like that's possible.
This will be the third truck stop type facility,
Yep.
right?
Yeah, it's in keeping with the other corners, right?
But
And of course, we have the new water tower, which is well over 100 feet tall. So I mean, there are quite a few tall objects. Our tower, the water tower, the neighborhood's tall.
sure. But if they can't advertise in the same manner as the other two, there's some doubt, right? Where's the developer today? Are they concerned?
Yeah, they had told us after the first meeting that they had stopped engineering on the site, and their language was pretty negative at the first hearing. But of course, we were told there wasn't an appeal process at the first hearing. But then in subsequent weeks, we did learn there was an appeal process, and they're expressing some frustration about the wall request, because they kind of see that as yet another hurdle that's being kind of tossed out there. So there's definitely some frustration there, and obviously there's some other options. We're not an island, up here in terms of available property. There's Vaughan, there's Ulm, and so I think there is a real concern that development could go elsewhere.
Is the other side of the street by interstate, county?
Half and half. So the development on the east side is city. The development on the west side is county. And of course, they're both town pump now, but when they were developed, they weren't both town pump.
You don't understand that, but on this side, over by I-State, on our corner property, that's half and half?
Oh, so just a corner of what the developer is buying is county, but it'll have to be annexed into the city to include the development, because the development can't overlap city
No,
and
but I mean,
county.
if they were to go on the other side of the access, the airport access, by I-State trucking?
Oh, down that way. All of our property is city. When we were annexed in, everything was annexed.
Okay.
So
we
no
don't
matter
have,
where
we
they
don't
go
have a
on our
county
property,
option down that road.
they'll still have the signage issue no matter where they go on our property. Yeah. Now, of course, if they're in Vaughan or somewhere else, then they have different rules in the county. So, yeah. So, yeah.
It is the Board of Adjustments, and there are 5 people on it, and I'm looking up to see if we know who those individuals
I'm
are.
not familiar with that board at all. I'm not really sure. I think that may be where you take your tax appeals. Does that sound right? If you're worried about your taxes?
I think that could be.
Any other questions on that? All right, we'll roll into the next item. So on your desk, you'll see we've received 2 letters from the airlines since our last meeting. One is from the Airlines for Americas, and the second is from Allegiant. And the subject matter of both of those are the street assessments, which those of you who've been on board know we've been in conversations with the city since about 2010. And I don't know, Laura, you might remember if there were conversations prior to that.
Yes,
Prior.
there's always been.
It's always been on that. So when I got here in 2010, the city had indicated that our street assessment agreement had expired and that they wanted to renegotiate street assessments and wanted to be paid the full street assessment. The way the street assessment works in the city, they add up all of the road maintenance costs throughout the entire city, and then they divide that more or less by the acreage in the city, and then everyone is assessed based on their acreage. And so there's a charge per acre, and then they multiply that times your acreage, and that's how they determine your street assessment. And so all of those funds are used to maintain streets within the city. Up here at the airport, none of the roadways serving the airport are city maintained streets. And so all of that money is used in the city. And so the FAA has, I think the Airlines for America letter actually lays out the arguments very clearly. The FAA for a long time has had prohibitions on use of airport funds off campus. And in some cases, the most extreme cases I've seen are where a state DOT and the airport will get into a real tiff over who should pay for the off-ramp. And in a lot of cases, those off-ramps solely serve the airport, but the FAA has always maintained that it's not their responsibility to get people to the airport. Now, they use this same logic. It isn't just street assessments. Many cities, like for instance Missoula, wanted to pursue the airport for stormwater assessments. And in other cases, I've seen other types of assessments. street light assessments, all kinds of things. And unilaterally, the airport, the FAA has always upheld that the airport should not pay impact fees. We can pay for services that we purchase. For instance, if we wanted to pay the city to come up and plow our streets, we could pay for that on a cost recovery basis. We can pay to have a county provide sheriff, on a cost recovery basis. Oftentimes those are audited, and the airlines file oftentimes what's called a Part 16 complaint, which says that they feel that those payments are not reflective of the cost value of the services being rendered. And so what you see here is Airlines for America is a trade organization representing, in our case, Alaska, United, and FedEx, three of our carriers. As this request, the city was in conversation with the FAA, I think after the spring, where we had some initial conversations with the city about the street assessments. The city must have contacted the FAA. We didn't become aware of it until this fall, when the FAA reached out to us and asked if we could staff some legal requests they had, to look up some of what Airlines for America has provided. And that has now progressed to headquarters at FAA, so it's in the compliance office in FAA. And so they're looking at the city's request to determine its merits, and in the process of that, the airlines have been looped into the conversation, and you can see their thoughts in both cases here. I think they've done a good job of laying out the arguments against it. And I like how the Airlines of America letter has both captured the code, the Part 49 code, as well as the conversations that have happened at the congressional level about the intent of airport funding and what it's intended to be used for. I find that to be an even more enlightening discussion, because they really get down into a layman's discussion of how airport monies are to be used. And so both of these letters were directed at the city. I suspect there'll probably be another one from Delta, who is not a member of Airlines for America, that will come at some point. All of them concerned over the impact of these fees. And I think it's less the dollar amount than the precedent. As you can imagine, there are 300 airports in the United States. There are 300 municipalities, counties, and other government entities that would like to use that as a funding source. And so the airlines are very protective of that, be it street assessments here or some other assessment elsewhere. Those dollars add up and make it more difficult for communities to maintain air service. And so, I think, we know their feelings on this matter. We have not weighed in on these letters at this point. I'd open it up to the board if you want us to respond in some way or add to the discussion. I think the FAA will eventually make a determination. The airlines will react to that determination in whatever way they react. And I think the conversation will proceed down those lines. And so I don't know if there's anything that we imminently need to do. Every year I sign grant assurances every time we receive a grant saying I won't pay impact fees. In addition, we're required to defend against uses of airport revenue other than for airport uses. We have presented the city with our arguments, these same arguments back in 2010. We provided a legal brief from Missoula that was put together by that city in March for stormwater fees using many of these same citations. They did a really nice job. And Missoula just concluded discussions with their city, and the city has agreed not to charge them impact fees. And so they've concluded an agreement with their city. So at this point, I don't know if there's any action that we need to take directly, but I did want to make you aware of these. We don't, as I mentioned, the city manager at one point, the most of the land that was given to the airport was given through a federal grant directly to the city. And so the city signed these same grant assurances about how airport revenues are to be used. And so, it's in a way new information to the city. At the same time, back in prior to 2001, every year they signed the same grant assurances I sign now, and have some awareness of that. And as I said to the city manager, think of it this way: the federal aviation system is giving you 2,000 acres, gave the city 2,000 acres for an airport. They don't have to do that. You don't have to have an airport. But they gave you that in exchange for not charging taxes and impact fees. Our property isn't, there's no property tax paid up here, and you're not supposed to charge impact fees. But, there are economic impacts. And so the other handout I gave you, this is just kind of an illustration of the economic impact of an airport. If you look at the top page, this is data put together by the University of Montana about the impact of travel in Cascade County alone. And so, this is specific to all of the travel in Cascade County, not us. But there's about $200 million in non-resident spending in the county. And so, if you turn to the next page, what I've got in here is the non-resident visitation and the economic impacts that the state says they receive. So every year, looking at 2017, about 12 million visitors come to our state. They spend about $3.4 billion. So for every visitor, the economic impact is about $269.74. When you break that down on how that money is spent in Cascade County, we've got these percentages of how the money is spent. 25% goes to restaurants, 18% goes to hotels, so on and so forth. One fun fact, only 4% goes to the rental car companies in Cascade County. But when you look at just GTF's rental car business, just our business right here on the hill, a $10 million a year business, the rental car companies are. So that gives you an idea of the scale of revenue that we're talking about. And so when you look at the third page, what we've done is we've taken one illustration, just the Chicago flights, because this is a new flight for us. This was the first year we've run that flight every day. And so when you look at the growth of that flight in the top set of rows there, you'll see that we ran very full flights, 85 to 92% full. You see how many flights we had per month, how many boarding passengers we generated per month, the increase in boarding passengers. I mean, what a success story. We had 270% growth in August in the number of passengers on that flight, 174% in July, 152 in June. When you come down from that and you look at the total of the airport, that gives you an idea how many total flights we run, how many total passengers we run, and what the growth was over the prior year, July being an exceptional month with 11% growth. Increase in boardings over the past year, right there in July, 2,000 additional people came in through our airport. Now, back to the Chicago example, when you look at the non-resident spending at that 269 from the prior page, just some simple division, the total visitation spending for 2018 for the month of June, actually this is do you guys have, I think I have the wrong sheet. Do you guys have one with 3 columns? Okay, I picked up my one off my desk. I'm gonna throw that away. So when you look at the total visitation, the additional visitation spending for 2018, this is only on the Chicago flight that we're talking about. Just the impact of that Chicago flight, $267,000 in June. July was $374,000, $230,000 in August. That's just the impact of the visitation at 64% of the flight, which is what United tells us comes in versus out. And so, when you look at that over the course of a summer, I mean, that right there is, $800,000, $900,000 for one flight. Well, we have 14 daily flights. And you look at the categories of how that gets spent, just that one flight in the community. And so the economic impact of these flights is tremendous. And just that Chicago flight alone is putting nearly $1 million into the local economy in all of these categories that generate property taxes in our community. And so, we believe we have a compelling economic development story to tell about the community, that these additional flights are generating their fair share of benefit to the community. And there certainly the roads are used by passengers in the city that are coming to the airport. Some of them come from Canada. I was talking to a family that came from Missoula. Sometimes the highways are used and our public streets aren't used to get to our airport. But we are paying back into the system through the amount of visitation that flows into our community. And so I think there's some solace that can be taken with regard to the impacts of the airport in the community. We have the only Montana hub for FedEx in the state. Another important factor for us, because we get those 75 jobs over there, they could easily be in Billings or Bozeman, which obviously ship more packages. But we have them here, and there's an economic impact associated with that. There's a business impact associated with that, being able to drop your package off so late in the day. By the time you can drop your packages off here, flights are already inbound from Bozeman, Billings, and all the other cities. Same thing in the morning. You're going to get your package. If it gets anywhere in the state, it's going to get to Great Falls. And that's a great thing when you're waiting on that Amazon order for your kid's birthday or waiting on your medicine. All of the state's VA medicines come into Great Falls. I saw a big bag of them sitting over there the other day, and when those drugs need to be somewhere, they're going to be in Great Falls for sure. So. There are a lot of impacts that we have that people don't think about when they think about the airport. But I think broadly, these impacts are positive. There's a lot of economic benefit to them. So, I leave that with the board, and entertain any thoughts you have about our need to address these letters and the issue at hand, the street assessments with the city.
So I just have a couple of questions.
Sure.
Maybe a few. It's taken almost 6 years to get to where I understand some of the funding mechanisms and where we're at, and some of the dollars that we're talking about. But the FAA, the funding mechanism for an airport our size, you described it, it's an inverse funding, so.
Yeah, so for the first passengers that come through the airport, we get $4, and that's a graduated scale to the point where you get 28 cents when you're a large hub. We stay in the deeper part of the pool, so for every passenger that comes through, we're getting $4 or $5 in just FAA guaranteed funding, the entitlement side of the pool. And so that translates into about $2.2 million per year that we're guaranteed our federal entitlements based on the number of passengers that flow into our airport. And those funds all come from the ticket tax. And there's no local funds used. It's all from the tickets purchased nationwide in the system that fund that Aviation Trust Fund, as it's called. And the Aviation Trust Fund has never been used for anything other than airport development.
In large part because it's diversion.
Yep.
Federal dollars come in, take federal dollars outside of the system. That's really not what the FAA wants to do. They want to fund the growth of the airport.
No, and I mean, even the conservatives amongst the most hawkish of folks in Washington have agreed that user fees are probably the way to go. And the aviation fund has been one of the shining examples of where that has worked, where the system has been able to balance itself based on the funds from the users and the funds from the local folks that use the airport, right? So I mean, we take all of our funding, the way our system works, we take all of our revenues to match our grants. We use it all to pay for our O&M expenses, our operating and maintenance expenses, and what we can't cover from what we get from the passengers, we charge the airlines. So it's a true cash drawer system. We get to the end of the year, which Maria and I will be working on here shortly. We look at what we did or didn't generate in revenues versus our budget, and then we go back to the airlines and we either write them a check because we did better than we thought, or we charge them an end-of-the-year check based on the amount of expenses we were unable to cover with our passenger revenues.
And that's about $2.2 million, right?
Every year we get 2.2 in entitlement funding. We also receive discretionary funding, which is based on the need of the airport and the competitiveness of the project. So when you add up our last 5 years, Marina and I looked at this the other day, over the last 5 years, we've generated $4.2 million in annual AIP, Airport Improvement Fund proceeds. So $4.2 million flowed into our system from the federal system for projects in our community over the last 5 years. It's almost $20 million, well over $20 million, almost $21 million.
Those are for capital projects.
Yep.
Runways.
Taxiways, runway primarily, that was a $10 million project.
Yeah, so the $10 million project, we have to fund 10% of that.
90% is federal, 10% is ours.
And we do that with operating revenue. We don't take any state tax or local tax,
No.
right?
No,
Self-funded.
Yeah, self-funded entirely.
And the $20 million of capital projects, those have gone to local contractors.
Largely. Challenger was out of Columbia Falls,
Sure. So their labor was out of Columbia Falls. All the
Right.
materials, I think they bought locally.
Concrete came directly from, materials from concrete came directly from United.
Okay, so 20 million has gone back into our community, or largely gone back into our community for capital projects?
Yeah.
Okay. And the 20 million plus the 2.2 a year, if the FAA determines that we have diverted revenue for street assessments, do we lose that funding, or are we at risk of losing that funding?
If in their determination, they determine that we should not pay street assessments we pay, we will lose that funding. We will be in violation of our grant assurances, which means we won't receive any more grants. And hypothetically, we could have to back pay.
Okay, so 20-some plus, and I asked you for street assessments that you gave me from the city, I think over 5 years. The largest street assessment, and it varies year to year, was $80,000, I think.
Right, and so
The full street
The
assessment.
full street assessment.
So
We have
we'd be
historically only
trading-
paid 7.5% of that.
Right, but we'd be trading 40 million that's coming into our community for $80,000 worth of street assessment.
If we paid the full amount.
Correct. I just want to make sure, because I talked to a couple of the airport tenants, you said no property taxes are paid, but what you meant is no property taxes.
Test rod, you think, or? Somebody might have burnt the toast. See what Rob says.
Can we just take a 5-minute break and
Let that
see if
clear?
this goes up? I don't want to talk over it.
No smoke out here. No
Just
smoke.
remind everybody the exits, there is a stairwell right here in this hallway if we have to leave.
Be sure to look behind you as well. The nearest exit may not be in front of you.
Yeah, we don't have a slide, although that would be fun.
What happens if you pay the street assessment?
It's funny, we've never had the fire alarm go off. Kick it back.
Going outside, it's too large. Hello, how are you? Sorry, my hands are so cold.
That's okay. Cold hands, warm heart.
So on the flip side, if there is a fire, we'll warm up in here. Well, it's in the levity. I'm gonna bring heated bits.
Are you doing?
Good, how are you? It's fine.
Well, let's. Both. It's somewhere it has to be at a certain time. Buy a discount, or guaranteed.
Plugging away, we got 3 more weeks till the end of the semester.
Yeah. It's still not bad.
What was that?
Can you believe it's almost done?
I know.
Then I just go standby. So for Berlin, and my wife had some
Men's team will be faster. Women's team will be better.
Iceland here.
I think it's going to be, hopefully, us for us or
Yes,
Carol.
but when we went, he commented.
Man, are we good?
And then I wanted to make sure from the Berlin back United and went first class from Berlin. We were so it cost me $80.
And the players that stayed around.
120 to go over and $80 to come back. You just have to be flexible and watch the lights. You know, we're gonna stay a couple of days longer.
And for private.
That's a good.
And he wanted to come to Great Falls for personal reasons, so. All good. He's made some huge.
Go write yourself some notes.
It's a little faster now.
Right now.
Been to hockey games. Fun. It's really cold in that building.
Colder than in here?
Dress, yes, you need to wear a blanket to sit on the metal bleachers and you need coats. They only turn on the heaters outside. And then the heaters don't radiate heat down on the bleachers.
Yeah.
You can see your breath in the building. It's cold.
It's colder inside the house.
Oh, good lordy.
It is if we have a hockey team after grades come out. 22 of the 24 players are freshmen.
Yeah, we left.
So a lot of them
9:45 flew out.
going to class, not doing the
We got to
work.
the
Coach didn't
airport
know about it
about 8:30.
until
Took 10
some of
minutes
them
to
started
check in.
getting pretty cold.
30, almost 45
See
minutes.
how many
TSA.
you have to meet certain eligibility requirements.
It's grade average or is
It's
it?
grade point average.
So what is it?
Oh my gosh.
I don't know what.
I need that. Need that.
Well, they're gonna
I mean, they're not in NAIA, they're an independent.
Yeah, they're gonna put
hockey
four lanes
association.
from
It has their
these
own
guys turn lanes.
Usually it's,
So it'll be the two lanes
freshmen,
right now.
sometimes they'll actually let them get
Slow.
below 2.0, as long as they're making progress.
And then cut them around right out.
Good, good well. Did you enjoy that?
Around behind.
But for freshmen, they understand.
Yeah.
Especially athletes.
Something's never changed.
Yep, flowing.
I think that's probably water pressure from the tank.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Good salt. Well, it's gonna be all the
Okay.
way down to the minute.
We're gonna get back to business. This could be a long meeting. I just want, I gotta make sure I understand the street assessments. Vince, if you don't mind, sorry, just want to keep it moving. The street assessments, the airport authority was formed in 2001.
Officially.
Officially in 2001. Grant assurances were well understood at that time. And there was an agreement in place. And the agreement was what for street assessment?
So the agreement was we would pay 7.5% of the street assessment. And if you look at the historic agreements, what it starts off is acknowledging that we do the maintenance on our streets, which going back to 1995, the initial annexation agreement, when the land they initially attempted to give the land to the airport authority, the annexation agreement said the roads would be the responsibility of the city. And so it looks like from there, in 2001, when they started with the street assessment agreements, they acknowledged that initially, that the airport is maintaining its own streets. And the agreement goes on to say that we'll pay the 7.5% administrative fee. So we had been paying up until 2017, when the last agreement expired. I had negotiated an extension in 2010. We finally got it done in about 2012. And so that sunsetted in 2017. When that expired, we got another assessment, Maria did, and I contacted the city and said that our agreement has expired, we need to address it. In 2015, I had gotten a note from planning saying that they recognized the agreement was going to expire and that they were working on a longer term agreement. But we never received that agreement, and there was never a discussion about it at all until 2017 when I said, hey, the agreement's expired, we'll need a basis to pay this, because every year Maria has to report all payments to a municipality on a report called CATS, an electronic system that the FAA audits to see what those agreements are, what we're paying. And the problem was in 2017 when we got the assessment, the way it works is currently, or what we were doing is we would pay the full assessment under the agreement, and then they would refund everything with 7.5%. And so obviously without an agreement in place, we didn't want to pay the full assessment because we didn't know if we would be refunded the rest of it. And so, currently we're in arrears back to 2017 on any street assessments because that agreement expired.
Okay, and the 7.5%, I think the airlines have called it illegal revenue diversion, right? That's
Yeah.
their term.
Even the 7.5%.
But the 7.5% somehow, that's become somewhat palatable to the FAA.
I don't even know if that's the case. I mean, we agreed, it had been done historically when I got here in 2010. And so, we told the city, probably any payment is not in keeping with the revenue diversion standards, but it's a relatively minor amount. And so we're willing to continue these historic agreements until we're told not to. And so we had continued that in 2010 and 12, when we finally got that agreement extended. I think the airlines are right in saying that any impact fee is probably not in keeping with the FAA rules on revenue diversion. And the FAA has never opined on the 7.5% administrative fee. They've only told us back in 2010, this looks like revenue diversion, you probably shouldn't be paying it.
And 7.5% usually adds up to less than $10,000, right?
Yeah, I think there might have been a $12,000 one in there. But yeah, right around 10, 12,000 for the 7.5%.
Okay, and then when it was gonna sunset, or you were aware of it, you started the negotiations at that point to try and continue that same revenue stream, the 7.5% to the city. But that's where we find ourselves today.
Yeah, so in 2015, we had correspondence with planning, and they said they were working on a longer-term agreement. And that's when we had taken over the entry road, because the entry road was actually a DOT road from the water tower back to the interstate. The city had an easement for it, and at the time they were getting ready to do a chip seal. And I happened to be at a city planning meeting where they said, we're planning to do a chip seal up there next year. And I said, well, that doesn't make any sense. I mean, why don't we just take your easement over and maintain it like we do the rest of the city streets? We really did that because, number one, we knew we'd be developing along the road there, and we're going to cut up that road anyway. We wanted to make changes to the Mang intersection, which we had been talking to the city about. So it didn't make sense to make an improvement, spend $100,000 chip sealing, when we had major renovations planned anyway, and we were hoping to do a mill and overlay, basically replenish the entirety of the surface rather than just a surface treatment. So we told the city at the time, why don't we take over your easement? And ultimately, we ended up getting the property from DOT back so that they didn't have to do that improvement. And so as part of that discussion, the city said, well, city planning said, well, we plan to do this longer-term agreement, and we recognize that you're taking on more of the maintenance, and so that, we'll have to factor that in. And we felt that was a positive sign that, maybe there would be, more communication about that street assessment agreement, but there wasn't. We never got the draft. I did ask a couple times about it when I would see that planner, and we never got anything. And then in 2017, we realized it had sunsetted and that we needed to ask the city about it. So we did when we got one of the assessments Maria received, and we said, hey, we need to extend this agreement or something. And that's when the whole discussion came up about whether or not they would even be willing to do another agreement.
But we're not taking over more maintenance on the existing streets. What it really means, we're taking on more length of street when we did that. Right, because we're right up to the
interstate, all the way to the exit, yeah.
So now the airport owns that, and it's including snow removal.
So
All maintenance on the road, potholes, chip seal, any seal, all of that type of work is being done by the airport.
And it always has. When you look back to before 2001, which is, that road had not really had anything done to it prior to the authority taking it over, or since the authority took it over. And when you look back at the city, when they maintained it, they were using AIP grants. They were using airport funding to do the street lights, for example. We found an AIP grant for the roadway improvement. So how that easement never got transferred was probably just a mistake. But when the city was using it, they were using airport funds to maintain that piece of road. So historically, airport funds have always been used to maintain the road all the way to the interstate.
Okay. So if you had to estimate even snow removal for a year, if the city had to do it, because I assume Rod does it now, Rod and your crew.
Yeah.
Any guesses?
By, several thousand a year.
Easily, I'd say yes.
The vehicle, the manpower, the sanding.
Sure.
We bought a purpose-built vehicle just, 3 years ago for
Yeah.
that entry road that we don't even use anywhere else. Because the airfield equipment was too big to be out on the roads.
Okay.
So, I would say it's got to be at least $8, $9, $10,000 a year. We typically, during a snowstorm, dedicate a temporary person to the roadways. And we have $5 million in the capital plan today for roadway work between the interstate and FedEx. And we just spent, Chris, what was the loop project, $2 million?
Yep.
We just spent $2 million on the loop around the terminal building. That was 3 years ago, 2015. And then we have $5 million in the capital program over the next 5 years to renovate the roadways from the entry road, what we did last time, and from what we did last time out to FedEx.
So really, the FAA could see that $80,000 as appropriate if they were, or if the city was paying for all those roadway improvements.
Yeah,
A
as I
couple
told,
million here, $5 million in the future, a couple $100,000 that you've discussed.
potentially, I think, the same language still applies as it says in that letter. We would have to show that we're receiving as much value as we pay.
Sure.
So certainly we could contract, the city to do that maintenance. It would improve the case if they were doing the maintenance up here for them to get street assessments.
Sure. Okay, and just to go back, to clarify, because you said there's no property taxes paid, but I think what you really meant is there's no property taxes paid by the airport. But the airport tenants pay a significant amount of property tax. Eagle Jet is what?
$4 million in development.
4 million, that's property tax
Yeah,
revenue.
property tax revenue.
The
ISP
12
is
million that
probably
we
another
can't.
2-3 million.
We can't quite get the sign approved for Love's, 12 million, that's property tax
Yep,
revenue for the
absolutely.
city.
Yep.
So everybody who's up here is paying property tax and property or street assessment as well. Or no?
No, they won't.
No street assessment.
Street assessment's on the land.
Right, okay. Okay, I do remember that. Okay.
And if you really think about that street assessment, I mean, we house Mang, so we give them acreage for free. I mean, if we inherit this cost, are we to charge Mang for it? That would be the best matching of cost and revenue, which is what we're supposed to be doing. And so, would we charge Mang? Because they're our largest leaseholder by land. FedEx is next. You can see where this really becomes a negative economic principle, when we start doing that.
The airlines, it's not just Great Falls that Airlines for America or airlines have written letters for, though. I think they wrote letters in support of the airport in Missoula when it was impacted.
Oh, they may have. That I don't know.
But what about Portland?
So, yeah, the Airlines for America right now, they've sued in Portland to prevent the city from charging stormwater fees. And so that's in the courts right now because the city would like to have stormwater fees they feel, similar arguments actually, that the passengers using the airport system are contributing to the stormwater on roads and other facilities that they use to get to the airport. And so the city would like to collect stormwater fees from the airport. And so the Airlines for America has stepped into that, and they are pursuing it legally through what's called a Part 16 complaint. And so that's in litigation right now.
Sure, with the city of Portland.
With City of Portland.
So legal expenses, Great Falls is going to enter that fray for $15,000 a year.
Well, again, the last assessment we got was 50 for 2017. Now, we don't believe that's been calculated correctly because we consolidated a bunch of parcels in that prior year. And so we haven't received an updated bill, have we, Maria, after so in 2017, or just prior to that, we consolidated all of our parcels to minimize the number of parcels. We had dozens of parcels. And so every time a tenant would try to do a survey for a leasehold, they were crossing boundary lines. You get into the question of whether you have to vacate these parcels in order to create a parcel for a new tenant. We had a real hodgepodge going. And so the way the street assessment is formed is there's a 200-acre cap. And so by consolidating all those parcels down, now we have fewer parcels and they all hit the 200-acre cap almost. And so we believe that the assessment should be probably closer to 2025, but we have not received the updated assessment based on our acreage change.
That's the full assessment, not the 7.5%.
That's the full assessment, right. We believe should be around 25, 20, somewhere in that neighborhood instead of the 50 that we've been billed. But again, the city is pursuing currently, they would be pursuing the full 50 that we've been billed for 17.
Can I ask a question?
The rest risk to the city in this process is they could end up with nothing.
Well,
Not even the assessment.
my concern is we've kind of crossed that bridge, because both the airlines and the FAA now are indicating that they don't want us to pay the administrative.
So it's all or nothing.
Yeah.
Well, by then, yeah.
So John, could you clarify a couple of your comments earlier? You said Missoula defended successfully against it. And at what point is that now? They just had the decision?
They have an agreement in place now.
Oh, they have
Yeah.
it.
Our understanding is the agreement's been in place for a few months.
Okay. And then the second part of that was when you were mentioning the 300 plus reports. As far as, is it accurate to say no one has ever lost this case then in these instances? Did you say that, or did I hear?
I'm not aware of any impact fees that have been paid. Now, of course, there are probably some, localities where they don't know any better, and maybe they are paying them. I can't say for certain. that
Right,
every-
okay.
But I can tell you, the examples I'm aware of, at CTAC, we had an attempt to charge impact fees that was successfully defended. In Colorado Springs, we were a city department, and the city wanted to charge us both stormwater and streetlight impact fees, and those were both defended. And the city in both cases determined not to charge the airport for those, because, like, for instance, in our case, the stormwater that we collect is entirely exclusively on our system all the way into the Sun River. We own a federal permit to transmit that water into the Sun River. And so in the case of Portland, they feel that they are at 100% catchment also, and that they're not using the city system, and that's one of the reasons that case has raised the interest of the airlines, is because they don't feel that they're receiving anything, that the stormwater system is receiving anything from the airport.
The precedence that's set by impact fees, it goes from street assessments to lighting to stormwater,
Police.
everything across the nation. So that's why the airlines are concerned, because in turn you would have to charge the airlines for those costs.
Most likely they'd inherit most of the costs at most airports.
Sure, so they're gonna take it pretty seriously, because Great Falls would be the start of 300 and...
About 300 commercial service airports.
Okay, so they'll take it seriously and try to defend against it, as they are in Portland, I'm sure, who has a much bigger budget than Great Falls does for legal expenses.
Sure.
Right? Okay.
Yep.
Some of the concern that I have is regarding a TIF application that we have today. A TIF that we're paying into. And you've provided information to the city, and the city came back and said, because we don't have an agreement and we're not paying any assessment, that may affect our TIF application. Is that right?
Yeah, so planning told us that back in February last year that because we were in arrears on street assessments, they had to acknowledge any local taxes that we were in arrears on in the TIF application. And so, I responded back to planning and said, well, that's fine, but if you're going to present that information, which I think is fair, I mean, certainly they can tell us we're in arrears. We are in arrears. I would agree with that. But at least acknowledge the other side of it, which is we have always, since the inception of the airport authority, had a street assessment agreement in place, and we've always paid the 7.5%. And right here in this email, I'm telling you, we would like to extend that agreement again. So let's be fair and present both sides and tell the powers that be that, we've never paid that. We've always had an agreement in place, most likely because it acknowledges that we're not supposed to be paying that. And the airport is willing to extend that agreement again. So we did exchange with the city planning department several times on that point, because we just want it to be a balanced discussion. I mean, certainly, I think it's fair to say that, it's not fair to say we haven't paid the street assessments. We have, in accordance with the agreement that was in place to pay street assessments.
Okay, but we're in arrears either based on two dollar amounts, full street assessments or the 7.5%.
Yes.
Either of which, if we pay at this point, because, and you didn't go to the FAA and ask about the 7.5%. The city went to the FAA, and the 7.5%, to Commissioner Barrett's point, is now well known, and so the FAA is probably not going to want to pay that. If we pay those taxes that are in arrears, then we potentially lose how many federal dollars over the last?
About $4.2 million a year.
Yeah.
Yeah, about 4.2 million is in jeopardy from the AIP program. And consequently, I mean, I suppose they could say we couldn't charge PFCs either, and PFC revenue is another, what, 680,000 a year?
Around 700.
About 700,000. So I mean, we could be approaching 5 million, you know, in funding per year.
Okay.
Which would shut down the airport. I mean, you're not-
Well,
there's
certainly
no
when
way
you're
you're
getting
gonna
any
be able to-
projects done. I think we could go a few years without projects.
It's a couple of years without projects.
Yeah, but in part we have FedEx because we have the infrastructure
Oh,
we have
exactly.
today.
You can't maintain the infrastructure, you won't have.
Well, and no airport has ever lost their funding. You know, if it came to that, it's unclear if the FAA would even allow us to continue to have our operating certificate. I mean, you know, you would probably be in jeopardy of losing your Part 139 operating certificate, which allows us to receive commercial flights.
The Missoula agreement, I think you forwarded that to the city a year or so ago.
About March.
So they've had that.
Mhm.
They've been aware of the Portland lawsuit because we've had multiple discussions.
We haven't talked to them since we found out about the Portland lawsuit. Really, what happened was the FAA had been having an ongoing discussion with the city. I met with the city manager last spring, I want to say May or April, and we kind of talked about this, and we said, you know, and he asked me, do I think we can pay this? And I remember saying legally, no, I don't think we can, but we're willing to extend the agreement. You know, and so from that point on, we never had any other discussions. And then about 2 months ago, maybe a little longer, the FAA contacted me and said they had had an ongoing discussion with the city attorney's office regarding these street assessments, which we weren't aware of. You know, and so they asked, you know, can you lend us some legal support to develop these arguments? Because of course the Helena ADO doesn't have ready access to an attorney. You know, and so, you know, that's when we became aware of it. It was about 2.5 months ago that they had had an ongoing discussion with the FAA.
Okay.
Just what's the next step of going by the FAA?
Yeah, this is, I talked to the FAA last week, you know, following these 2 letters to just kind of see where we were and see if this information was helpful, and they thought it was. And so the ADO in Helena, which has had the interaction with the city, is compiling their findings, and they'll be sending that to the compliance office in DC. When I talked to them last week, the compliance office in DC had not received anything. So I think the FAA has been asking the city for more information to develop those findings, the information that the compliance office will want in order to make that ruling. I think the sticky wicket is the airlines, you know, and what their reaction will be, both in the interim and then once the FAA has determined, you know, what they believe. You know, I think that's the unknown.
I think part of it is our concern as well, because passenger growth, right, has been pretty contingent on the fact that we are the lowest cost airport in Montana.
We are, you know, we've had the lowest price ticket for the last 6-7 years now. You know, and you know, you asked, does $15,000 a year matter? Does $10,000, $20,000 a year matter? You know, I think what I'd point out, and Shane knows as well, is, you know, we're in discussions for a new route right now for next summer, and those numbers aren't all that dissimilar from what we're talking about in terms of annual incentive. And so we're in a time when communities are providing major incentives, millions of dollars. And the Missoula article that just came out a few months ago, you know, they've got $1.4 million for that Dallas flight, and they're going to spend quite a bit of that. You know, and so we're in a time when communities are incentivizing air service. You know, and so when you look at Allegiant, who's notoriously, I don't want to say frugal, let's put it that way, notoriously frugal, you know, and can be somewhat emotional, you know, and you know, in terms of decision making. And you know, you look at something like this that they're aware of. I mean, it is a concern, and you know, I think, you know, their reaction to it could be, you know, negative.
But if we lose the $2.2 million, which is just the entitlement, our PFCs have to go up, right? The amount we charge the airline.
It can't go up, we're capped. We can't charge any more PFCs. Oh, you're talking about cost per employment. Yeah, so our cost per employment to the airline would go up dramatically, yeah.
Sure.
I mean, realistically, we couldn't afford to operate that way.
Okay.
So really, the next question is, do we as a board authority need to provide a letter to the city reinforcing these 2 letters are already here? Or should we just stand by and see what happens that comes out of the FAA ADO's office and compliance and see if that shuts off the case?
I
Do we need to
think-
get to see if we can convince the city to back off?
I think those are all the options. I mean, we have a little bit of a timing issue because we are out there right now trying to get a couple new routes, one of which is from Allegiant. And I think that timing's unfortunate because, Eric Fletcher, who wrote this letter, is a government affairs guy. He used to be our route analyst. And Eric and I are good friends, in the industry. And, I know this is the type of thing that does concern them. And so, they like to feel like they're welcomed in a community and treated well. And, and I think even though we're not the same community, there's the airport, there's, the chamber, which has helped us incentivize air service along with the CDD. They look at the composite of the community as everything that's happening there. And so, I think, one, option we have would be to try to compel the city to not continue. I think the other option would be to sit pat and let the FAA rule. I think, the airlines might pursue that either way, to make sure that their interests are protected. So I think there's a number of options that we can pursue there.
There's a lot of variables to it though, because initially the city went to the FAA and just said it's street assessment and we use total acreage across the city to calculate. I think the FAA came back to them with a pretty emphatic answer, which was this is not allowed. You risk your FAA funding. And then more recently, on a more creative note, the city then went back and said, well, we contend that passengers use city streets to get up to the airport. And so they're trying to poke that fence in multiple ways.
Yeah. Yeah, no, they're evolving their argument, and that is the same argument they're making in Portland. And so I think we can kind of look at the Portland trajectory to see what, is likely to happen in the future for, this is, the airlines are likely at some point to get engaged, more fully.
But based on some of your revenue numbers per flight, spending per passenger, $270 per passenger, and where that money is being distributed, and that was not a study by the airport, right?
No, it's done by the state every year, state every few years.
So all the local restaurants, bars, hotels that are paying street assessments are paying it to some degree on the backs of airport travelers coming through Great Falls. Not the city residents of Great Falls,
Right.
but those airline
Well,
passengers.
and another argument we made with the city in 2010, because the other, and the airlines don't even bother to make this argument, but the FAA says that we should be treated like any other division of government, which means if you have an authority and you have a parks board and you have a school district, we should all be treated the same. And so one point we made to the city is, are you assessing the general fund for the parks district, or is the park district paying out of their user fees? Because certainly it's the same residents that are using the airport that are using the parks, and probably there's more residents using the parks than the airport. And the city does not assess the parks. So I think right there you've got an example of yet another argument, of fair treatment amongst the divisions of government. Because one of the things the FAA hates to see is when a community sets up an authority or another governing body so that it can be taxed. That's one of the, when they get into the weeds on this, it's one of the things they'll look at is, well, was the authority set up such that they could be taxed by the city? When you look at the Parks District, I mean, is that a similar case? Possibly, because they're not paying out of the general fund or out of their user fees for their acreage. And so, we're a subdivision of the city, a political subdivision of the city, and so one can make the same argument with the Parks Board, that maybe they should be paying street assessments.
Any further questions on?
I think the city has to go forward with it now, because now they're in an all or none situation. So to get anything out of this now, they've got to push it till there's a definitive ruling, I think.
One of the concerns, though, is this TIF application, right? It does affect some revenue that we've paid into rightfully and should receive rightfully. And if they say these taxes are in arrears, that won't end likely until they end this argument with the FAA, which I think we've seen as a board, and maybe Deb and Sean probably has some of the better history There's been a lot of a debate with the FAA over regulations, rules, changes. We all saw the construction of the runway and the details that went into some very specific angles that it had to be and corners. The FAA really doesn't bend much. There's not a lot of argument there. They have a written manual that is not likely to change. Certainly, if airlines are suing Portland, the airlines certainly will sue Great Falls. And in the meantime, we wait for TIF money, which is funding economic development up here.
Yeah, the water line serving the $4 million hangar is $100,000 of that will be paid for with the TIF dollars. And of course, the TIF district was formed in a time when we weren't paying full street assessments. That TIF district goes back, we figure 10 years.
It's certainly out of our budget. If they didn't come in right away,
We would have to amend the
we can
budget.
self-fund it until such time as the agreements are in place and the TIF agreement can be back paid to us at a later date.
Yeah, I mean, I would point out, as you all know, the discussions we had over the last 6 months, we are right up against our reserve limit. When we are counting on those dollars to come in, to help rebuild those reserves back from, the limit, because we are ahead of the federal funding cycle. We did forward most of our 2019 grants into 18 in order to get the infrastructure in place for the Eagle Jet hangar. All of that infrastructure down there, the road, or the pipes, the sewer lines, the taxi lane exceeded what we had in place for funding this year.
I think if there's a point to be made, it should be on the TIF funding, not the assessment. I think he's trying to make a case for separating the two issues. Because maybe technically we are in arrears. In the spirit, we are not. Because
Right.
we've had this agreement. We're going to pay whatever is due. There's just a question what is due now. Nothing or something.
Right.
And separate. I think that needs to be separated from the TIF.
Exactly.
That's the argument we need to make as a board.
Right.
Because we need the TIF funding.
Yeah.
So we've got to make the case for the TIF funding, independent of what the FAA rules on the assessment fee. So-
Yeah, again, I think that for the argument, I think it's telling that the TIF district was formed 10 years ago when the street assessment agreements were in place. And so, I mean, obviously at that point, they weren't connecting, the payment of street assessment with the TIF district. So I think, that's a reasonable argument.
It's a good argument. In good faith, I think we started this in 2015 to try and resolve it, and we're still going. And so really,
I think you're making a good faith case, like Vince said, to the city. If we, as a board, sent any message, it would be that let's separate the two issues. We're discussing good faith on the assessment. We're going to do whatever the FAA rules and whatever they say we owe you. If it's anything, we will. But we need TIF funding. I think if there's any letter from the chair of the board, or whether it's the mayor or whatever,
sure.
however we usually communicate those things, I think that's what needs to be communicated. I think stay out of the assessment stuff. That's not our fight. The city took it to the FAA.
Well, I think we want to be a little careful with the assessments because it is partly our fight.
Well, the result is.
Yes.
But I think that the arguments being made, or the discussions between the city and the FAA, because we found out about it after the fact.
Through the
We
FAA.
were involved in it, so.
Okay.
It's like they're holding us hostage, like we're gonna make a different decision. And so you think as a community, you would say, look, what would you like the board to do? What would you like the airport management to do? Make a bad business decision that you've talked about for the last hour? That doesn't make sense. It's our money, correct, in the TIF fund. It's just the process that they approve that. So to me, it's like holding someone hostage that's your brother.
I think the city would say it's their money because it is property tax proceeds. Rightly it's their money, but when the TIF district was formed, I mean, that's kind of when you take that inflection and say, are we willing to reinvest this in economic development or not? And, so I mean, in a lot of ways, that boat kind of sailed when the TIF district was set up, I think.
Yeah.
If you can't rely on those funds, what's the point of having them, I guess would be the,
We can talk about, so the TIF is scheduled for next Tuesday
Tuesday, yeah.
at the board meeting or
At
work
the
session?
commission meeting at 7.
7 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. And has the board spoken at a commission meeting before? In any function?
Yeah,
This isn't
you know,
informational, I know, I think,
just information.
possibly
Yeah.
Brad did as well.
Yeah,
at one
Brad
point.
came a couple times, and we've made, generic kind of airport, what's going on type presentations. And we've actually had joint meetings of our board and the city board in, probably it's been 5 years or more since we did those, but the city did a couple times ask for that. And we did those here at the airport where we would have joint meetings.
Sure. Okay.
May I give public comment?
Yes, please.
Would you mind if I sat down in order to give it?
No, it's okay.
Thank you. Not feeling that well. I am somewhat taken aback. I am not unsympathetic to the sentiments and the arguments that I've heard here today. For the record, my name is Mary Moe. I'm a city commissioner, and so when you talk about what the city is doing, I sort of feel like you're talking about me. And I have the same concerns that you have, Chairman Rooney, in terms of the contacts that have been going on and that sort of thing. But the fact is that in this meeting, I've only heard one side of the story, as have all of you. And this is a publicly noticed meeting and a publicly taped meeting, and there's no way that a member of the public, much less the city's delegate that is supposed to come to this meeting every time, would know from this agenda that you would spend an hour on this subject without making the public or the city aware of your intent to do so. So when we talk about fair play, let's talk about that a little bit too. This is the second time I've had to make a comment like this. But I feel like I'm representing the city when I come here, and I can't represent them if I don't have any idea that what you're talking about is something that I should be conversant with. And so I'm not doing my job, and I don't think it's my fault. Thank you.
Do you think that, and just for the board, there has been a significant amount of discussion between you, John, and the city staff, and you've been very careful to try and not go above the city staff, and you've asked the city to inform both the mayor and the city commission on all of these items as well.
I guess I'm surprised. I mean, again, as part of the TIF discussion, we asked that this information be forwarded pretty specifically to the city commission, as part of those TIF discussions. And that, I think that was February of 2007 or 18. So some number of months ago, we asked that this information be shared, and if the city was concerned about the street assessments, that both sides be presented, what the history of that street assessment is.
And I have heard that. My point to you, however, is that I didn't know it was going to be at this meeting. I'm not prepared to discuss it. What I have heard is pretty much what's contained in the letters that Mayor Kelly has received.
Yeah, that's good, and much like any open session and during the director's report for the board's information, and I leave the board at the end of this year, I've been here 6 years, we have a lot of new board members that need to hear this information. So while you may feel this is specifically narrated for you, it's not. It's narrated for the rest of the board so that they have enough information to make further decisions throughout the course of the year on what actions the airport should take. And while I understand you may feel you want to participate, the fact that you're uninformed, don't see that as our opportunity or our effort to leave you out. This is more for the board members that are here because they don't know all of the history that's occurred and they don't know the numbers that have come. The fact that you're here and you're participating, I think is fantastic. I hope you'll take that back to the rest of the city commission and share it in whatever form you wish. But the discussion we're having, whether it's an hour or 4 hours, is for this board.
Respectfully, Mr. Chairman, you're at a public meeting in Montana, and you have the obligation to notify the public of things that you are going to discuss in which the public might have an interest, whether they're in the director's report, which under this, you could fly a Boeing 737 into the director's report and nobody would have any idea. And it's just, the way we do things in Montana, and there's a reason behind it. And that reason is that the public and those who are being talked about want to know and want to be able to respond. It's fair play.
Point taken.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions about a direction we need to take with regard to either the TIF or the street assessments and the FAA's discussion with the city? Great, thanks. Is there anything more on the director's report?
No, I think we've spent enough time.
Perfect. Thank you for taking the time, I appreciate it.
Quick question. Remember, Commissioner Moe brought up a point that, as a new member, I'm not clear on that. When we have to give public notice of an agenda, and I remember my training, I had to go back and look up, but there's certain things we have to include in that notice, and those are
Spending,
votes that we have to.
contracts,
Agenda
things that
items.
you might vote on.
Do we have, I mean, like, if there's a director's report, this was, the length of discussion was surprising, but it was driven by a lot of questions our chair had, not, I don't think you had anticipated, but do we have to make legally a formal notice of what
Well,
the
again,
topics are you're going to make? And
I don't know that there's any action we can take, on any of this, quite frankly. And I point to the construction, briefing we gave. We could certainly be sued by any one of those contractors. There are potential outcomes, that we could foresee or not foresee that come out of the construction report, but
I just want to make
most
sure our
likely be
agenda
present
is meeting the legal
information.
requirements that Commissioner Moe raised.
Right. And
I
then
just would like clarification on that in the future. to make
we can
sure.
certainly ask our attorney, but
And I don't know.
in general, we generally present general information like the construction report and other things that we've
That's what I'm.
noticed without.
Should we put a standard agenda under your report saying for public, I don't know. Just want to make sure we're complying with the law.
Yeah.
I'll ask Mick to clarify. General rule though is, that public notice is the agenda that you have here, which is everything that you're going to take notice on.
Action.
So if anything in discussion rolls into something else, it can roll into something else, but you can't take any action on it.
Okay.
Well, I
So
think-
you'd have to still have 2 readings on it at some point. You're still going to have it on the work session. You're still going to have it on the board meeting before you're going to take action on it, which gives 2 readings for the public.
For example, if we wanted to do some action on what this discussion led to, we can't do that at this meeting.
No.
It wasn't on the agenda.
No.
Closed session.
So like all discussions, they have to begin somewhere.
Okay.
And it's through question and answer. And while this did come out during this meeting, I think at the last 6 or so meetings,
It's been ongoing.
we've had this discussion.
Yeah, the topics.
And we'll continue to have that discussion because as a board, we do have to be informed and are trying to root that out through those questions. and answers.
Well, we have a TIF hearing next week, and
Yeah.
so I think it's relevant and timely for the board to be informed of the TIF hearing. I mean, obviously, that'll be a public notice meeting, and it factors into
Okay.
this discussion.
And from that, it could go to a working group in December to put it onto the meeting in January.
No, it's already the second hearing.
Yeah.
It's already the second.
The TIF hearing. You're talking about the TIF hearing. I think he's talking about, if we wanted to have some type of action.
Right.
We could have a meeting in December and then put it on the January agenda. Or, we can have 2 special meetings, which we have not done in a while, but yeah.
Thank you.
Moving on to agenda item number 1, the acceptance of the final 2017-18 audit.
We'll ask our auditor to make some comments on that.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Megan Connors. I am the in-charge auditor at Anderson's and Reelin here in town. Rick Reisig extends his apologies. He's traveling out of state for other meetings. I first wanted to talk about the fact that, we enjoy working with you guys. We have been working with you guys for several years now. I think I'm on my 5th year of this audit. Maria and John and our team work really well together. I think every year we become more efficient and we make the most of it. Maria asks us really good questions. We get really good responses from her. She's very responsive to our requests. We have no issues performing this audit whatsoever. It is a really streamlined process, and we appreciate that on our end. It makes our jobs easier, as I'm sure it makes Maria's as well. We reviewed these audited financial statements with the Finance Committee earlier this month in quite some detail. We spent about 2 hours going over some of this information, and so today I'm just going to keep it pretty quick, high level, give you guys some of the results of our audit, and we can move on with our meeting. The audited financial statements consist of 5 main areas. We've got the management's discussion and analysis, which is really the management of the airport putting into narrative form what happened as a result of what you guys see in the financial report. We then see our financial statements and the required footnotes, and then we have 3 reports in the back that are regarding internal control over the financial statements, the federal financial assistance programs, which we audit the airport improvement program every year, and then the passenger facility charges. On the financial statements and the footnotes, we have an unmodified or clean opinion, which is great, and we're happy to report that. There was no major changes in content for you guys this year. There was no, implemented accounting standards that affected you. There were some applicable to other governmental entities, but you guys did not see any of those effects. On the federal financial assistance program, so the AIP funds, we found no findings or areas of non-compliance. And then as well as on the passenger facility charges, we didn't find any areas or findings of non-compliance. So I wanted to keep this quick, but I also wanted to open it up to questions if any of you guys had them after reviewing the final audit.
Some of the Finance Committee members here today.
Yeah.
It's always in the past, if there's been any comments from the Finance Committee, we've asked for those for the rest of the board.
Yeah, there were no surprises, no unexpected things. There was no topics or issues. We went through it pretty much section by section at the Finance Committee meeting fully. So we did a pretty deep dive on it, and there was nothing in there that raised any concerns that I had. So it's pretty clean.
The only thing I'd add is just on page 7 there, you have kind of our little summary of the management's analysis of the financials, the discussion and analysis. And we did narrowly top record revenue. I think 4 out of the last 5 years we've hit record revenue. We were able to grow revenue by under 2%, but we grew expenses by less than 1%. So that was a good result. We're very comfortable with how the year ended up. And so I think a positive direction, and ideally next year, as we get some of the Eagle Jet revenues flowing in, and potentially even the development of Commercial Lot 1 flowing in, and some other exciting changes in our food concessions at the end of the year, we should see additional revenue growth. So I think it's a year we can all be positive about. A lot of good things in the financials there that we were able to achieve. So.
I walked away with pretty good confidence that the airport staff is doing a great job with compliance and keeping the books straight. I didn't see any concerns. So congratulations for a pretty good job.
Unfortunately, I missed the Finance Committee meeting, and I apologize, but I think either during that committee meeting or sometimes in this venue at the board, I think you also talk about accounting changes looming on the horizon. Is there anything particular coming up?
Yeah, so the one that might affect you guys the most, which really shouldn't have too much of an effect on you guys, in fiscal year 2020, we're going to see the GASB come into play over leases, which is coming into play sooner for non-public companies this year. And so it's going to change the way that entities are having to record leases on their books. It's mostly on the lessee side, so if you guys have any equipment that you lease, even down to the copier, depending on how many and how material those amounts are, they're going to have to be reported as an asset on the books, and a subsequent liability, not a lease liability, but it's like a right of use asset, and then you kind of amortize the cost of the lease. On the lessor side, because you guys do lease a lot of property, what we might see happening is some lessors wanting to, or some lessees wanting to change the lease agreements because of how those might look on some of their bank covenants. But really, for you guys, it shouldn't have a material effect. But that's the nearest one coming for you guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have to take board action to approve the acceptance?
Now, we have a recommendation typically from the Finance Committee to, a motion and a second from the Finance Committee to adopt the audit, and then typically the board votes on it.
I'll move that we accept the audit as presented.
I'll second.
Great. Are there any other questions or further discussion about the 2017-2018 audit?
I'd just like to thank AZ for doing a good job and also congratulate management for having a clean audit and everything going smoothly, so good job.
Thank you.
Thank you. So seeing no other comments or questions, all those in favor of accepting the final audit as presented, the final audit for 2017-2018 as presented, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. Agenda item 1 is accepted as written. Are there any additional comments from board members? Commissioner Kimball?
No.
Commissioner Harris? Nope. Commissioner Smith?
Nope.
Commissioner Bachman?
None.
Commissioner Evans?
I just had a question for John. I unfortunately didn't read the story well enough, but I think I saw a headline today that Missoula has annexed the airport.
Yeah. Yeah.
And any commentary on that?
No, I think that's kind of, par for the course. Most of the airports in the state, Bozeman being the exception. Billings is in the city, we're in the city. And I think, the airport authority has wanted that for them to be able to access some public utilities. And so, that is true. They did annex the city, and they did annex into the city. Yep. And as part of those discussions, they clarified all those impact fee things up front.
Oh, sure,
Yep.
yeah. Okay.
Is there a December meeting?
We don't plan one. There's a Christmas party, which is a public meeting, but there's typically no business discussed there. There's an outside chance that should the airline that we're working on come back and say we want something completely different than what our current incentive policy allows. We have had to have a December meeting in the past to change the incentive packages, but we don't envision that this time.
Great. Are there any additional public comments? Seeing none, with no further business to come before the board, I declare this meeting adjourned. If we take a 5-minute break and everybody's back at about 20 to 4.
Actually, 3.
Sorry,
Clocks.
it's 20 to 3.
Daylight savings time.
We'll continue with the work session. Is that good? 5 minutes.
I wonder, it seems like an eternity.
Time is in charge of fixing that clock.
That's right. That's right.
You was here, John?
Yeah.